Have you been dreaming of finding a tiny house on maybe a couple of acres in Sedona, Verde Valley, or maybe even Flagstaff or Prescott, but yet you're having a hard time finding something and making that happen? Well, I want you to know you are not alone. There is a very big demand for the tiny house, and it's also very hard to find one of those that already exist in Northern Arizona, or finding a lot that you might be able to have one installed on. So in this video today, I'm going over some of the obstacles on why you can't find a tiny house in Sedona and some of the roadblocks you're going to encounter if you try to find a piece of land to install a tiny house in some of the Northern Arizona towns. Hello everybody, my name is Dawn Dickinson and the channel is Living in Northern Arizona, where I'll teach you everything there is to know about living in the Northern Arizona towns. I am a licensed real estate agent in the state of Arizona, and I sell primarily in Sedona, Verde Valley, Flagstaff, sometimes Prescott and Phoenix. So if you ever have a question about buying or selling a home in Arizona, please reach out to me. My contact information is always in the description below, and you can give me a call or a text or an email and I will get back to you. Okay, so let's get right into it. I do get a lot of people reaching out to me looking for a tiny house in Sedona or Verde Valley and sometimes Flagstaff. Now, I have been selling real estate in Sedona and Verde Valley for the last 7 years, and I have never seen a tiny house in Sedona. I am pretty sure there is not any that exists, and the reason behind that is because Sedona's zoning and building codes make it very difficult for you to get a tiny house, and it's going to be the same thing for all throughout Yavapai County, which would be also the Verde Valley towns and the Prescott area towns. Coconino County is a little bit better, but you're not going to find them within the Flagstaff city limits either. Might be possible a little bit outside of town, but I'm just going to give you in this video the lowdown of all of the obstacles that it would take for you to buy a piece of land and install a tiny house on the land, or for you to just find one that's currently for sale. Okay, I'm going to start with Sedona because I currently live in Sedona. Now, I do get a lot of people looking for either a tiny house already installed in Sedona. Now, there are none, maybe in one of the mobile home parks, but I have never encountered that. But that would be a case where you don't own the land. But again, no tiny houses in Sedona. I've not encountered them in the other Verde Valley towns. However, there could be some hidden gems here and there. I've just never seen one, and the reason for this is because of the zoning rules. So there are very strict zoning rules in Sedona. Sedona has ordinances that regulate the minimum size of the home, which is actually a problem in almost all of the communities, that it's difficult to get zoning for a 400 square foot home. I know even in places like Stoneman Lake, they have a 650 square foot minimum, so difficult for finding something that has a zoning ordinance that will allow something that small. And many of the residential zones require a standard single family home, don't even allow a manufactured home or for you to bring in something on wheels. Now, building code requirements, Sedona follows the International Residential Code, the IRC, which sets the standards for permanent dwellings. Tiny homes on wheels usually don't qualify because, for one, they are on wheels and they are treated like an RV and not permanent housing. Again, we touched on the minimum square footage. Many of the zoning areas have a minimum home size of like even 1,200 square feet, which is actually quite low. Many of the places in Sedona have much larger minimal build size for a home, and again, do not allow something that they would consider even a manufactured home or an RV in many of the neighborhoods and subdivisions here in Sedona. There are RV and mobile home restrictions, and a tiny house on wheels is often classified as a recreational vehicle, and in Sedona and in many parts of Verde Valley, you generally can't live full-time in an RV on a residential property except in an RV park or maybe a mobile home park, and even those sometimes have the minimum square footage that is going to be over 400 square feet. And then there are aesthetic and community standards. Sedona is actually known for maintaining very strict design codes. You can't have certain colors, you can't have certain look to some of the properties, and those standards are in place to protect the landscape and the character of the community. And non-traditional housing that can run into some pushback during the approval process when you're trying to get a building permit. And finally, there's limited amount of land. A lot of the areas are already built out, and even if the zoning is allowed, Sedona's land is very limited. Not a lot of lots for sale. Very difficult to find even a small lot in Sedona for less than $200,000. So a lot of people with the tiny homes are thinking of paying much less than that for a lot size, and that would be a lot, like a small lot, like a quarter-acre lot. So if you're looking for, you know, an acre or more, you're probably going to get priced out. And when you do find a lot, it's not going to allow the tiny home on it. So that's just making it very difficult for you to put one in. Now, I don't want you to think it's impossible to get a tiny home. These are the kind of challenges that you would be in store for if you were going to pursue the idea of getting a tiny home and putting it on land. Some of the areas outside of the city limits, maybe in the Red Rock Loop or other parts of Yavapai County, Coconino County, might have different zoning rules. Some of the RV parks or private parcels might allow like long-term parking for the tiny homes on wheels, but overall Arizona has been slowly adapting some more of these tiny house friendly rules, but right now Sedona is still one of the stricter ones, and I really don't see that changing. Now, I'm going to go into a little more detail about these building code restrictions so that if you are doing some research and maybe looking for something outside of Sedona or maybe in Coconino County, you'll know the kind of things that you'll come up with. Sedona, for instance, currently enforces a 2018 International Residential Code, the IRC, which includes what they call Appendix Q, which sets those specific standards for tiny houses. And those rules require, one, a minimum of a 32-inch egress door, habitable rooms of at least 60 square foot and a minimum dimension of 6 foot by 6 inches, and a full continuous foundation. There's where we get into some trouble. You want to pour a concrete or a masonry foundation, and then you would have to install the home by a professional, of course, so that the tiny houses on the wheels are not permitted. You could maybe bring them in on the wheel, but these are the codes that you're going to have to install it on a foundation, a proper foundation. And a lot of times these are cost prohibitive. By the time you would get an expensive lot and pour a proper foundation, you could have put a manufactured home or built a single family home for not that much more. Now, I want to say that there's not an outright ban on the tiny houses. It's just that Sedona's Land Development Code, the LDC, makes barriers very difficult for you to do this because, of course, there is the minimum lot size of about 6,000 square feet. The setback requirements 20 feet from the front and the rear, which limits your buildable area, and these restrictions make it physically difficult for you to install the tiny homes. Now, I'm going to go into another section where we're talking about accessory dwelling units, ADUs. Now, I'm seeing a lot of the homes in my neighborhood, on my block. I'm actually thinking of doing it myself, where now the county has loosened restrictions for an ADU, but this would be on your already existing lot with a home. A lot of them are putting in what, you know, started maybe as a shell similar to a storage shed, but really they're just a small structure, and then people will make that an ADU. You maybe could install one of the tiny houses on a lot and make it an ADU, or they're just building little ADUs, you know, from site built from the ground. I see several of them on my block, and that just adds another room or two. Typically, you're not going to have like a bathroom connection because of the homes being on a septic tank. Your tank is probably not already rated big enough to add a couple of a toilet connection or a sink connection, but those are the types of issues that you would come up with. So again, the Sedona allows 1 ADU per lot, and it's subject to these rules. The ADU must be less than 750 square feet, but no more than 50% of the total square footage of the main building, the house that you already have. So, you know, this would be something you'd do if you're going to have your kids come stay with you, or your mother-in-law, kind of like a guest station. But what I see more often is it's more like a little private office for somebody. I wouldn't mind having one of those and moving this recording studio, which is a spare bedroom, to an ADU, and then that would give me the space to have the bedroom back. Right now, when I get a guest, I have to move all my lighting equipment and everything out of this room, but that's just something that you might use ADU for here in Sedona. The state law, the HB 2720, now enables ADUs to have the kitchen and prohibits some of the stricter regulations. But again, I'm talking about the technical hurdles that you have about the ADUs, being things like getting an attachment to your septic tank. If you're in the sewer, again, you may want to pursue this possibility by adding an ADU, and maybe a tiny home is something that would work. So let me review some of the barriers we just talked about. The biggest barrier probably is that you require a permanent foundation. So no wheels, no trailers are allowed. They must be built as a permanent structure. Taken off the wheels, put onto a slab or stem wall made out of concrete or masonry. So that is a lot of involvement. Again, we've got setback and space restrictions. A lot of them have minimum built square footage, way bigger than the 400 square foot that you might see a tiny house. And again, the setbacks, again, not a lot of land available for sale that's zoned, that even if you did want it, the land is very expensive. Like I'm saying here in Sedona, a quarter-acre lot that's not in a flood zone probably would be around $200,000, and in most of the neighborhoods where you would find them, they are going to be prohibited. Now, most of the research I did was in Yavapai County in Sedona, Verde Valley, but you're also going to have similar barriers in Flagstaff. I did sell a lot in Flagstaff. It was actually outside of the city limits, and the buyer was putting in a tiny home. It was a beautiful tiny home, looked like a log cabin, about 400 square foot, had its own contained, kitchen, bathroom, loft, and even a tiny master bedroom with the front porch. Gorgeous, but I could see there were a lot of obstacles. They were having to put in a septic tank, they are building the foundation, they're getting all the permits from the city of Flagstaff, so they are doing it, but by the time they are done, I'm not sure if it's really cost effective, because instead of a 400 square foot house, probably for about the same or not a lot more, you could get a larger house. So that does kind of discourage people from doing that. So I'm going to talk about some of the other towns in the Verde Valley. First of all, Cottonwood, for instance, is kind of ADU friendly. It updated their zoning rules in 2024 to allow with that Arizona House Bill 2720, and so now an ADU is permitted within the single family home restrictions. Some of the size and placement rules in Cottonwood, the ADU can be up to 75% of the size of the main dwelling, and it can't be any more than 1,200 square feet, so that makes you able to have a little bit larger one in Cottonwood. And some of the setbacks have been relaxed to 10 feet instead of 20, and 5 feet on the side. Now in Cottonwood, if you want to install a tiny house as a guest unit, all those same things that we talked about before are going to be in play. You're going to need to have the house removed from the wheels and put on a permanent foundation, remove their chassis, and put that extra stuff that could be a little bit cost prohibitive. So now in Clarkdale, there's no explicit updated ordinance that either allow or ban the tiny homes, but it's going to be the same type of things that you're going to have to worry about. You can't put them on the wheels and park them on a lot. You're going to have to define whether it is a principal occupancy or an accessory dwelling unit, and they may be preparing to consider the tiny houses because they are so popular, but right now there's no real clear policy for tiny houses in Clarkdale. Now in Camp Verde, that's probably your safest bet in the Verde Valley, because in 2018 the town council approved a use permit for tiny house community, which includes some vintage RVs and tiny houses on wheels under the agritourism rules on a specific 15 acre-ish parcel. And this was a targeted exception, not a broad policy change. It was handled as like a special use situation rather than a general allowance. So if that could happen once, I don't know, maybe there's some hope in Camp Verde, Cornville, and Rimrock. No specific information that I could find regarding if they're going to ever allow the tiny houses, but it's going to be the same Yavapai County zoning and regulations that are going to present the same obstacles that we already talked about. What can you do if you've listened to this video so far and I haven't scared you off? I'm going to give you a couple of suggestions if you really want to pursue the dream of having a tiny house in Northern Arizona. Visit the local planning and building department of Yavapai County. Again, if you are in Prescott area, or Verde Valley, Sedona, or Coconino County if you are in Flagstaff. Again, Flagstaff within the city limits. I don't think you're going to be able to pull it off, but maybe outside of the city limits and maybe on the side of Williams and going towards the Grand Canyon, you may be able to pull off the tiny house, but you're going to come deal with the same similar obstacles. If you're using a tiny home, definitely plan for the permanent foundation and taking off the wheels and the chassis and affixing it to the permanent foundation, which is going to require you likely to have a septic tank permit and that installed first. So those types of things. Again, we were talking about Camp Verde, maybe something that you could get a special use for. So you would want to ask Yavapai County Planning Department if that would be a possibility, or consider some of the other areas around Coconino County. Like I say, I was able to get a lot for a buyer outside of Flagstaff, but they are again having to do a lot of the extra stuff to get it installed. It's going to be great when it's done. I'm still not sure if it's really cost effective to do that, because you could probably get twice as much square footage and spend the same amount by doing it the traditional way. Now, the last place I had considered that you might find a tiny house would be like Prescott Valley, and I did a little bit of research. Again, that is in Yavapai County, so you're going to have the same restrictions that you might find in Yavapai County, because Prescott Valley is in Yavapai County. The tiny homes on the wheels are definitely not permitted in Prescott Valley, or again outside of the county, those towns in the county limits, because they're considered the RVs. Now, on a foundation in Prescott, you can only put a tiny home in as an ADU or a guest house. Prescott Valley, it's kind of unclear. The general plan is somewhat supportive, but you're going to have to go through the same hurdles. And again, like in Prescott, it's very highly restricted, unless maybe in a manufactured home zoned lot. Potentially more possibilities in Prescott Valley, but again, you got the formal codes of Yavapai County. So neither Prescott or Prescott Valley is going to make it easy for you to install the tiny house because of, you know, the wheel situation and finding a lot that's zoning. That's going to be the same situation in most of Northern Arizona. Now, if you are really hell-bent on doing this and you can't find one that's already existing for sale, which I'm going to say is highly likely, I think your best bet is going to be in some of the areas outside of Flagstaff and Coconino County, possibly like Williams, and maybe even going out more towards the Grand Canyon. And again, you're going to find a lot of lots that have no utility. So now, in addition to your tiny house, you may have to drill a well, you will have to put in a septic tank, and maybe solar panels. Again, that's going to make that very cost prohibitive. Now, I want to let you know that I only sell land in like Sedona Verde Valley or Flagstaff and say, you know, Muntz Park, Mormon Lake, or Stillman Lake, which is considered Flagstaff. So I only sell land in those areas. But if you are interested in looking at land in some place like Prescott or Williams, I have a great guy that works in my Flagstaff office that I send all my land referrals to in Williams, and he's been doing a great job. So again, if you were interested, I could hook you up. But again, going to be very difficult to find land. Another thing about land is you'll see them in the MLS, lots listed. There's no checkbox in the MLS database that says allows tiny homes. So you would have to look at the land, see if it's zoned for maybe manufactured home. But even then, probably zoning is going to restrict that, and almost all the time, like 95% of the time, listing agents don't attach the CC&Rs to the listing. So if you found it, you'd have to call a listing agent, hey, can you give me the CC&Rs? And they'll probably say sure, and they never will. So difficult. I mean, I could give you a list of lots for sale. I'm not calling up 30 listing agents asking for CC&Rs, knowing that only 1 or 2 of them will provide it. But if you wanted to do that, I could certainly provide you a list of lots. But again, you're going to have to do a lot of your own research. I don't usually do that. Maybe one of the agents I refer you to could do that, but that's typically not the type of real estate I sell. Like I say, if I'm doing land deal, it's only going to be in Sedona, Verde Valley, Flagstaff, or Munds Park. So that's it. I hope you found this video helpful. Again, a lot of high-level information, and if you really want to know more, you want to call Yavapai County Planning and Zoning or Coconino County. Usually they're very helpful at the county, I have found. So good luck with that endeavor. My name is Dawn Dickinson, the channel Living in Northern Arizona. I'll teach you everything there is to know about living in the Northern Arizona towns. I am a licensed real estate agent, and that's all I do. I don't have a full-time job doing something else. I sell real estate. I make the YouTube videos. And so if you ever have a question about buying or selling a home, please reach out to me. My contact information is always in the description below. And if you enjoyed the video, please do me a favor and hit the thumbs up button and consider subscribing to the channel. I post videos like this on my channel every single week, so I hope to see you back here on my channel again next week.